Greetings, everyone. This is Jeff Butts from the Mac Observer. I'm bringing you another episode of Terminal Tinkering, where we play around with just about anything we can get our hands on. This episode, I'm going to show you how to get started with your macOS installation on your PC by creating your Hackintosh installation disk. I will show you how to install FreeBSD on a Power Macintosh G5. So let's dive in, and we'll get started with the Hackintosh project. Now, in order to create a Hackintosh, you need two things. You need your hardware, which is your Hackintosh computer, and then you also need to have the software, which is macOS Sierra, macOS High Sierra, or whatever version of OS X or macOS you decide to go with. I'm sticking with High Sierra because I'm beta testing it and having a blast at it. So we'll go ahead and look at how you can create the install media that you need to install High Sierra. Now there's two ways you can get the High Sierra installer: through the developer portal or through the public beta. If you have a paid developer account, you're eligible to download the latest developer preview. If not, you can take advantage of the public beta and download it that way. So let's go ahead and download the latest version from the developer portal. And this is a tiny little program that opens a backdoor into the Mac App Store where you can download the macOS High Sierra installer file. So I'm running that program. I'll go through step by step. And once it's done, the Mac App Store opens up, and now I can go ahead and download the High Sierra installation file. Once that's done downloading, we'll go ahead and create our installer. All right. My install macOS High Sierra beta file has finished downloading, which you can see here. It automatically tries to run, so I quit out of it. We're going to create an install disk, and we'll do that from terminal. The first thing we want to do, I've already inserted my USB drive, so let's see what's on it. That's a really old file, really old partition, so I will unmount my disk and repartition that thumb drive. You don't want to do this from disk utility, because if you eject a disk from disk utility, it goes completely away. Instead, we're going to use disk util, unmount disk 4, and it says all volumes were unmounted. Now we'll go ahead and use disk util again to partition the disk, and I'm going to put one partition, GPT partition scheme, because that's what Mac uses now. I'm going to make it a HFS plus partition. I'll call it installer, and 0 bytes tells disk util use the maximum amount of space. And it helps when you do things right. We're going to disk 4, one partition, GPT JHFSS plus installer 0 bytes. And it's created the partition map. It's activated the partitions. Now it's formatting the disk as macOS Extended Journaled. We'll just wait for that to finish. And now we're ready to go ahead and create our installer. In order to do that, we access the actual installer from the installation file. Applications, install macOS High Sierra Beta, contents, resources, create install media, volumes installer, application path is applications, install macOS High Sierra Beta, and we specify no interaction. And now it goes through the process of erasing the disk, and then it will copy everything over. This is a pretty lengthy process. It takes sometimes as long as 15 to 20 minutes. When it's done, you'll need the Clover bootloader. So as soon as this is finished installing the files, I'll show you how to install the Clover bootloader. Okay, my installer is finished, and now it's time to download and install Clover. So let's find the Clover bootloader, download it, and then install it. We can get that from SourceForge, and I'll include the link in the show notes. Latest version right now is R4184. I'm going to download that. It'll take just a second. It's a pretty small application. And it's downloaded. I'll open up the zip file, go to the folder, and double-click the package file. Now it will say that it can't be opened because it's from an unidentified developer. That's easy to get around. I go to System Preferences, and under Allow Apps Downloaded From, I just say Open Anyway, and boom. We'll go Continue, Continue, and by default it will try to install the Hackintosh HD, your primary hard drive. I'm going to change it to my jump drive. Continue, and then I will customize the installation. I want to install this for UEFI booting only. I want the themes and drivers. You can install all of them, but that can cause problems. I know I need OS X APFS 2, and I will probably need EMU variable UEFI 64. So I'll install those to start. There's a few others that you'll need, and we'll get those momentarily. It takes just a short while to install everything into place. Okay. Now the things that you'll need on top of what's already there, and we'll go to our EFI partition, take a look at what's been installed. Under Clover, third-party drivers under Kex, there's nothing. Driver 64, we've got some basic ones there, but there are a few that we need on top of that. This is especially true if you're going to be using APFS. So I'll start off by looking for apfs.efi, and I find that through InsanelyMac. Now I could also, in fact, if I knew where it installed, I could take it directly from my working system. But let's assume that you don't have one yet. You can download that from InsanelyMac. And copy it to your EFI driver 64 UEFI partition. Next, what we need is something called fake SMC. We get that from RehabMan. And latest one is 6/7/2017. We'll download that, unzip it, and we see a number of Kext files there. Those are third-party drivers. We're going to copy those to the Kext other directory, and we'll go ahead and copy all of them. Depending on your motherboard, HW monitor and some of the CPU and GPU sensors can cause problems. So do your research there. Make sure those aren't going to cause problems for you. If you want to have network connectivity and you have an Ethernet card, You'll also want to make sure that your Ethernet drivers are installed. If you have an Intel motherboard, 100 series or above, your Ethernet driver is probably Intel Mausi. So from InsanelyMac, we can find the Intel Mausi Ethernet drivers. We'll go ahead and download those, unzip the file, find the kext file, and put that on my jump drive. That's a bare minimum of what you need. There's some other things that are sometimes nice, but for most systems, this will get you up and running with your installation disk. And from here, it's just a matter of booting off of the jump drive. So that covers getting your install media prepared. So let's talk about next installing FreeBSD on a Power Hackintosh. All right, now I'm on my Power Mac, which is a Power Mac G5, and I apologize for how difficult this might be to read, but there's no easy way to record the screen from the initial stages of installing any new operating system on your Power Mac. What I'm in now is what's called OpenFirmware. OpenFirmware allows you, it's basically the bootloader of the PowerPC Hackintosh. So you access OpenFirmware by pressing Command-Option-OF when you hear the startup chime. We're in OpenFirmware, and we're going to locate the proper files to boot from the CD that we have for FreeBSD. Now, in order to open up the CD drive, all you need to do is type eject CD, and it will eject that CD for you, and then you'll be able to put in your new CD. Now, you probably saw that earlier. After that, you can try typing boot CD, but chances are that won't work. You have to dig a little bit deeper. It's not as easy as it really could be, but that's the nature of OpenFirmware. So we look through the various partitions on our OpenFirmware, from our OpenFirmware, and what we find is that the proper location is CD:2, comma, // T as in Tom, B as in boy, XI. That tells your Power Mac to look for a bootable file, a TBXI file, on the second partition of the CD-ROM drive. So we'll run that, and you'll see that my Power Mac reboots itself, and it's booting off of the CD-ROM drive now. This takes just a short amount of time, and you'll watch everything scroll through the boot up process until you get to the installation process. It'll ask you, do you want to install, go to a shell, or run a live CD? I'll go ahead and hit enter on install. And it'll walk me through the various options for installing. I'll continue with the default key map. I'll choose a host name. I'll call this the Ancient One, if I can spell it right. And then I choose what files I want to install, what packages I want to install. I don't need base system debugging. I will go ahead and install additional documentation. Kernel debugging isn't necessary, but the various libraries, because I do some programming, are necessary. For most people, all you will probably need is the lib32, the ports, and possibly the system source tree. So I'll select what I want for my system, hit enter. I'll go ahead and let the installer automatically size my drives using the entire disk. I'll choose the Apple partition map for the file system type, and that looks pretty good. I've got my Apple boot, I've got my HFS drive, and I've got a swap partition. It'll write the partition tables, initialize the various file systems, and then it will continue with the installation. It fetches the various distributions. This is where it's nice to have your Power Mac already plugged into an Ethernet port or connected to Wi-Fi if you have Wi-Fi. I do not, so I've just got it straight into an Ethernet port. And it takes a few minutes to download the various distributions that it needs. Once that's done, it will verify the checksums for those distributions. Just waiting for it to finish downloading the source. And now you can see it's extracting the distribution files. Once it's done extracting, it'll be ready to install. In fact, while it's extracting, it's actually putting everything into place for your installation. This is a pretty quick installation process, but what you get is just a basic console text mode installer. The longest part for me is installing the source files, but that's done. And now what it will do is get ready to finish the installation. It asked me to select a password for the root account, so I'll type that in. Okay, now it asks if I want to set up my network interfaces. I'll go ahead and set those up so that they are configured by default. I'll set my clock settings, my time zone settings. Everything looks good there. And services I want to be started at boot: SSHD, MouseD, NTPD to keep the system time right. And I'm not going to do any of the special security measures, but now we'll go ahead and add a new user. And it walks me through that process. I entered in wheel for other groups simply because that will be necessary once I install the graphical user interface. I know from experience that the graphical user interfaces sit on the wheel group. So I'll add those in and then exit. I don't need to do any extra shell commands, so I'll say no and reboot. This is a well-behaved Power Hackintosh. A lot of times you'll have to do some more OpenFirmware magic to make it boot automatically. I don't have to do that in this case. It automatically goes where it needs to go. It takes a few moments to boot up. Once it does, it allows me to log in. I'll log in with my new username, my standard username, because I try not to log in as root. Well, that's all for Terminal Tinkering this week. Come back and join us next week when we'll see what other kind of trouble we can get into, what sort of gadgets we can tinker with, see what I can do with some of my old Mac hardware. If you have any suggestions, comments, or feedback, I'd love to hear it. You can email me at jeffb@macobserver.com or find me on Twitter as @clefmeister. Thanks a lot, and talk to you soon.